Hey, what's up everybody, it's Dan. So, I wrote this book post-COVID during a time when things were a little wild. After the failure to launch of the Iron Gift, I thought I could sell some self-appraised above-average fanfic. That didn't work. I'm not saying Games Workshop is wrong, and I probably didn't follow the process perfectly. Honestly, I'm not sure what I was expecting. I guess I was going through a weird time. But I thought it was pretty good, as far as 40K books go, anyway. So, here it is. Hope you have fun. And I hope you can forgive my decision to use an automatic voice. Trust me, it's for the best. You're going to see some weird flubs where Cortana doesn't know what is being said, but you're just going to have to deal with it. My horrific voice would not have been up to the task, and frankly, I'm not going to hire anybody for fanfic. And now, I give you Victory or Damned by Daniel Shepard. Prologue. Stricken from all imperial records by an obliteration decree, the Hurricane Sun was afforded the ability to operate under a veil of perfect anonymity. With facts reduced to heresy, isolated events play out without observable patterns, for there is no observer. Across 10,000 years, millions must die before inquisitive ears begin to accept truths that should never have been evaded. Whispers are collected, illuminating glimpses of a plot longer than any human lifespan, and unfolding across the ages, a dread picture forms. And so, the twice-damned crew of the Hurricane Sun lay forth their ultimate betrayal. At long last, and far too late to save the population of Saioji, a military response was organized, drawing together an emergency coalition from multiple branches of the Imperium's armed forces to confront this essential threat. For 3 years, Saioji burned to defy the enemy. Against this foe, the human soldiers of the 232nd are utterly outmatched. They are imperfect, as humans are known to be, and forced to fight a war in its most perfect form. Their suffering is enormous. Yet, if the human form is as holy as the Emperor proclaimed, there may be something majestic in their sacrifice. A blood-red sky pulsates with unnatural energy, and a campaign ends in its inevitable, catastrophic defeat. Abandoned by their allies, with their backs pressed to the acid banks of a boiling river, the 232nd stand by with no option but to sell their lives dearly. But the urge to survive is foundational to the human experience. The regiment fixes bayonets and assaults headlong to escape their encirclement. Over 300 soldiers will die in under 20 minutes of contact with the enemy. The survivors reach their transports and launch into orbit just as a series of cyclonic torpedoes strike the planet. Shockwaves of energy radiate outward across the planet, and tensions build in the planet's crust. With a great shudder, the tension snaps, and the planet's crust is torn asunder beneath the chaotic gravimetric conditions. With a whisper, nothing remains of the planet but background radiation and cosmic dust. The 232nd limps to the nearest imperial world to make contact with the Departamento Munitorum. Of their former allies, there is no other word. Act 1. Chapter 1. The World. Years prior, when they were young and alive. Michael had been too much a child in those days to recognize how close the danger was that night. Moving in his father's wake through the underground bunker network, the child knew nothing of fear. Instead, his father filled him with awe. As they moved through the complex, one ferrocrete wall blurred into the next, yet the child was utterly confident that his father knew the way. They twisted and turned through a path so secret and convoluted that none could follow. Moving through that warren, an old recruiting print affixed to the wall caught the child's attention, and he stared at it for some time, motionless. Time had faded the parchment, but the soldiers' bright uniforms stood out in young Michael's mind. They were painted in rank and file, wielding sabers or rifles with bayonets affixed. Each soldier was a discrete work, but considered in total their mass swam into a singular work of art. Only a moment later, the Captain General realized that the boy had lagged behind, so the father returned to collect his only son and lead him to safety. "Son," the man said with a voice as tender as any father's. "Let's go." Young Michael nodded, but couldn't move himself from the image. "What kind of soldiers are those?" the boy asked, expecting an answer like grenadiers or fusiliers. Captain General Tyrion turned to the propaganda. "Those are storybook soldiers. Let's go." Commissar Renaud de Laclos allows himself to feel some pity for the woman. She is about to walk headlong into a trap laid by an Imperial officer, and she doesn't even know it. He knows she is formidable and dangerous, or his sponsors within the Adeptus Terra would not have requested his intervention. He has been careful so far, and now that the pieces are in position, he will crush her with an overwhelming force. Standing there, studying the orbital traffic through the viewport of his troopship, the shade of his reflection stares back. He is dressed in his finest uniform, naturally. Dilaklos is a large man and powerfully built. He is tall, wide across the shoulder, and broad across the chest with a trim waist. He is as handsome as any recruitment poster. His black hair is perfectly tucked beneath his peaked cap. Perfectly manicured hands are seated neatly within impeccably tooled leather gloves. And past his gossamer image, the planet Desaria hangs in the void like a huge and malignant tumor, wreathed by warships, tithing representatives, assaying specialists, and other escort ships representing at least a dozen Imperial departments. Of course, it is nothing compared to Terra, but even after a decade of service, the power and glory that the Imperium of mankind can bring to bear can still stir him. Oh, the simple joy of being an Imperial officer. If there existed a problem that could not be resolved by brute strength, it remained unknown to him. Such sublime confidence resides in that fact. The commissar takes his seat in a hand-carved Savonarola chair and assumes a posture of quiet contemplation before clasping his hands across his lap. He is a man of singular ambition. The Schola did their best, which might have worked on men of lesser stature. But no power could keep his true identity hidden from him. Enter, he says to the dim portal. The moment she enters, the weight of her personhood floors Commissar Dilaklos. Lady Ingrid moves deliberately in a gust of lace and bright silk, head held high atop a spine as straight as a hairpin. All the light in the room clings to her as she moves to stand before him. And despite all his careful planning, Dilaklos knows he underestimated her. The woman does not meet his expectation of some backwater renegade. Momentarily stunned, the word regal loses its meaning. Her face is comely, and her attire is the very height of imperial fashion. Yet none of the subtle movements in her body language indicate entitlement or privilege. Beneath the lace, her arms are thick with muscle. Hardship has prematurely aged her lovely face. She radiates a confident aura of leadership, as if she had been born to it. Courtiers, ministers, and advisors can handle much. But she possesses that gravity, the one central requirement of a planetary governor, that subordinates all orbiting powers. It takes all his discipline to incline his head slightly and say, "My Lady Ingrid, thank you for responding to my summons." Commissar Dilaklos, she says with genuine friendliness. There is no chair for her, forcing her to remain standing. You must forgive me. Is that the proper style of address? We have such little contact with your offices. Commissar Dilaklos is fine. Might I offer you some tea? Perhaps some wine? He gestures to a sideboard carved from what he thinks might be knowlwood. But she shakes her head, no, and with a sudden urgency, she does something he had not expected. She moves quickly to the viewport and out of his line of sight. With that simple gesture, she deconstructed his ambush and regained the initiative. Is that what I think it is? She asks solemnly. He considers turning in his seat, but instead, he rises and looms behind her. Lady Ingrid gestures towards a long, cylindrical ship hanging in the void. Yes, the Caton, he breathes pointedly. Something like 20,000 families aboard? It will go a long way towards repopulation. Lady Ingrid remains silent for a time, and then she finally lets slip a whisper. I should have been consulted. At this, he paces away to force her to turn her back to the viewport and focus entirely on him. My Lady Ingrid, he says, gesturing humbly, I thank you for responding to my summons. And I do hope that the trip to orbit wasn't too cumbersome. There are two realities. One is the reality we experience, which we understand, informed by our crude senses and limited knowledge. The second is the reality that the Imperium of mankind foists upon us. To the naive, this may sound diluted. But make no mistake, Lady Ingrid, the Imperium possesses the power to dictate terms to the universe. He pauses to make sure that his quarry is focusing on him. The humble gestures disappear as he straightens. Subtle muscles in his jaw grow taut as his eyes narrow. My Lady Ingrid, you have been called here in response to these petitions you have been sending. and her face alarms just so delightfully. How have those come into your possession? Lady Ingrid demands in a firm and even tone. I submitted that correspondence directly to the Adeptus Terra. While beautifully penned and frankly persuasive, your arguments are structured around a fundamental flaw. You petition with the underlying premise that you are, in fact, the Lady Governor of Dasaria. I am here to disabuse you of that belief. She doesn't shut her eyes to deny this statement. Lady Ingrid hears him and smiles. Dasarian law is quite clear on this matter. The title passed to my father when Lord Governor Ithan died without issue, and upon the death of Lord Governor Steedle, the burden passes to me. There is no room for interpretation on this matter, sir. I am the Lady Governor of Dasaria. There is no petulance in her tone. Clearly, someone has trained her quite well. Indeed, she is formidable. Not according to the Adeptus Arbites, not according to the Estate Imperium, and certainly, not according to the Departamento Exacta. Not one element of the imperial governing body recognizes your claim. This is not a claim, Ingrid says pointedly. I am the eldest survivor of my line. These are the facts of the matter. And 3 days ago, your father, General Steedle, was executed by the Arbites for the murder of Governor Ithan, his own brother. My lady, I am not a negotiator, no more than you are in any position to negotiate. What I am is the truth. The governorship of Dasaria is forfeit to your line. My father, her voice hitches just ever so slightly, acted as loyally as any could under the situation. We repelled the greenskin without imperial interlopers. The Imperium did not suffer. The sons of Dasaria are a true end. Dasaria is a toilet. Delaclos cuts her off violently, and you and your line have fouled it most remarkably. You are the blood descendant of a traitor and a political pretender. In the wake of his declaration, Lady Ingrid appears dazed, nearly stupefied, and he knows he has her exactly where he wants her. Oh, do compose yourself, my dear. I am an imperial commissar, not an assassin. I have no authority to harm a civilian, and to soil such a remarkable gown, it would be an affront to human decency. My father was no traitor. Ingrid speaks more softly now. There's something behind her eyes that is rekindling. He saved Dasaria. We are a true and loyal people. Delaclos nods as she refocuses on her central thesis, baiting her down the path as strength and calm return to her voice. He smiles, welcoming it. The nobility of our people is ascendant, she proclaims decisively. We held back the greenskin without imperial resources. Yes, yet not without cost. Filthy backwater though it may be, the fibers this planet grows feed mills in 4 systems. Quarries provide aggregate, lumber, on and on. This planet will be operating in a deficit for years without the intervention of trade ministers to untangle this mess. At current estimates, it will be decades before the planet can even feed itself. We manage, Lady Ingrid says with open defiance. We always have. Perhaps. I understand the pull of legacy. It is such an attractive notion. Fate hanging at the far end of a just and valiant cause. But there are yet other concerns. Dasaria owes a debt to the throne, and the throne cannot be denied. The unexpected statement sets her to stammering. Delaclos closes on her quickly and takes hold of her face with a gloved hand to study it like a suspect piece of fruit. As he stacks stimulation, she can no longer speak coherently and so stammers dumbly. To that end, my lady, all remaining native forces are being transferred to the Astra Militarum. No, she ekes out, and he quickly jerks his hand away as if repulsed. No? I'm rather disappointed, Lady Ingrid. Perhaps you aren't the woman that I had thought that you were, but it is enough that your soldiers think you are. Consider this a prophylactic measure against any misplaced loyalties in your fighting men. You cannot, she says as her poise collapses. My lady, listen and listen well. The only thing that I cannot do is press my pistol to the back of your pretty little skull and dash your brains against that far bulkhead. The Adeptus Terra does not make martyrs as a matter of policy. As he speaks, he produces a silken cloth to clean his gloves. Many of these men will be sent out to different Munitorum facilities. What officers remain will be formed into the 59th Dasarian Rifles. Major Rawls will serve as the commanding officer. Do not protest, my lady. These men have already mustered aboard ship. She swallows hard, with the faults in her training beginning to unspool her entire sense of self. Tell me, my lady, what do you understand of the commissariat? The question refocuses her diminished faculties down an unfamiliar path. You are morale officers. Lady Ingrid stumbles over the words. You inspire the soldiers to do great deeds of heroism. What a noble idea. We are trained propagandists as situations require. But no, we do not inspire soldiers as inspiration implies consent. And consent is not a boundary that we acknowledge. The Departamento Munitorum draws supplies and soldiers from across the galaxy. The Munitorum will raise and equip the regiments that make up the Astra Militarum, including your band of would-be rebels. The commissariat, in turn, serves in the field to protect that investment. We do not inspire soldiers to fulfill their duty. We force them. We ensure that these soldiers serve a unified discipline with the correct loyalties. Commissar de Laclos gestures to a far wall. And as Lady Ingrid turns, a glass partition illuminates a distant room where 7 gagged Dessarian soldiers have been stripped to their sous-vestments and bound, face down, hands behind their backs. Leaving you, the queen that would be, on Dessaria with an armed and experienced cadre of loyal troops would be a colossal oversight, even by imperial standards for such oversights. We do not waste any resources, yet it remains within my authority to enforce discipline as I see fit. I can and will execute every man in this regiment until I have made it into something useful. Come, come. Laclos gestures to Lady Ingrid to follow into the next room. And for the first time, she sees the drawn pistol in his hand. Oh, and there it is. Her eyes go wide when she gasps for breath. Her flesh pales as her nervous system is utterly overwhelmed. Laclos has staged this all so precisely that he doesn't even need to hear her speak to know what will happen next. Had the soldiers selected been anything else, he could not control her response. That first one on the left, de Laclos points with his offhand. He smuggled 3 cases of rations to his orphan nephews before embarking. He didn't try to hide it. Lady Ingrid still has no reply. She stands there, eyes glazed over with her jaw slack, sweating profusely. He has stacked the cumulative traumas just so. And now Lady Ingrid must be broken to imperial reality. The next, she stole Militarum Pharmacopoeia and distributed it to the civilian population. Lady Ingrid is no longer there. She has disappeared inside herself. In another moment, she will be little more than an animal controlled by instincts to fight or flee. And deprived of those options, she could only fawn. My Lady Ingrid, I am a reasonable man, Laclos says casually. In times of war, compromises must be reached. But this is just too much for me to let slide. And there it is. With her throat jerking and eyes sparkling with tears, Lady Ingrid breaks. Release them, she says. Please. I will comply. The Imperium of Mankind, de Laclos chortles. The fact that you would say that indicates that the lesson remains unlearned. The fetters that bind you to your emperor are not transactional. Your offer of restored loyalty is appreciated but ultimately empty. Loyalty isn't a currency that the Imperium traffics in. The Imperium of Mankind traffics in power. Please, she shouts. Commissar, you have made your point. The bound soldiers begin to squirm against their restraints, though speechless from gags, their hearing remains. The commissar lifts his bolt pistol and fires into a soldier. Explosive munitions, even for a commissar, would be restricted aboard the ship, so the projectile that hits the first soldier is compressed copper. The skull pulps and chunks of brain and viscera spray across the room and into Ingrid's hair and eyes. The remaining soldiers' cries are muffled, but they writhe in desperate fear. No more, please, she demands as the tears spill over. The teardrops cut tracks down her face through the splashed blood. Commissar de Laclos selects another at random and fires a surgical shot. It's a clean kill, straight through the heart. But the violence as those copper warheads fragment has nearly torn this woman in half. Gibbets of spongy lung tissue slew off the wall. Lady Ingrid buries her face in her hands and shields her eyes. But with a gloved hand, he tenderly takes her hands in his own and lowers them. Please watch, my lady. They're doing this for you. He shoots the third in the base of the spine. There is nothing painless in that wound. Fragmented copper shreds critical nerve bundles. He hits another in the foot and then a third in the shoulder, which amputates the arm. Shot by shot, he does just enough damage to ruin the soldiers, but draws out their suffering with a marksman's precision. When his pistol runs dry, he returns his attention to her while exchanging magazines. Lady Ingrid stands reduced to an insensate shell, babbling an incoherent desire to quit this place and return to the surface. With gore dripping from his face, he smiles at her. Leave, Delaclos thumbs the bolt release, and a round snaps into the chamber. My lady, you aren't leaving. We've departed. We're proceeding to the Mandeville Point. This is a military vessel. The needs of the Astra Militarum do not bend to the will of a single person. She stands there, transfixed by these new traumas which awaken the old. Delaclos expends 30 rounds executing the soldiers, injury by grievous injury. They all die screaming. And when released, she wanders the ship in a fugue until the Dessarian guardsmen find her and bring her into their spaces, and they pass her off to Captain Michael Tyrann. In those days, Captain Tyrann's boyishness had only begun to fade. His hair was still entirely brown and kept in a long ponytail in the style of the Chevaliers. His eyes are just starting to crease at the corners, impulsiveness beginning to give way to wisdom. Captain Michael Tyrann surrenders his bunk to her. Warp travel stretches at the edge of perception. Life support is lowered to the minimum and the lights dim. Days pass into weeks. She remains a civilian hostage aboard a man-o-war. Everything is gray and steel and flesh. Exile. Hostage. Both. She is held in surety as some mutual assurance of good conduct farther and farther from the land where her duty resides. Soldiers and officers alike cleave to her, a lifeline to drowning men. He finds her that day more lucid than any of the days that had come prior. Her eyes are suddenly bright in the gray-blue cell. Tell me, cousin, Lady Ingrid says. What was our uncle like? You knew him better than most. My Lady Ingrid, Tyrann nods in the gloom and gathers his words. The Lord General Ithan? Please, Michael. That's more than enough of that. As you say, cousin. What would you like to hear? Just to hear you tell it, she says in a voice as thin as paper. Well, in its simplest telling, our uncle was a man whose ambition was unequal to his means. So it's a cautionary tale of the perils of progress. But the detail is important. Dassaria had been a feudal world for thousands of years until this last century. Isolated as we are, it's like the rest of the Imperium has forgotten us, which suits us just fine. We are loyal, yet we are accustomed to making do on our own. He pauses at this and wraps a field blanket around her before holding her tight against the gathering cold in his cell. As for our uncle, the late Lord Governor Ithans is a story best told in two parts. Before we were born, when our parents were young, Dassaria could feed itself fairly reliably. But Ithan was a man committed to a great and mighty Dassaria. So when he entered the governorship, family farms were seized to commence mining operations, disrupting millennia of egalitarian tradition. Imported industrialists were paid for with agricultural products, triggering famines. When my father was alive, they probably crushed a major uprising every 3 years. Progress extracts a cost that should be expected. Only posterity can judge its value. The mention of Tyrann's father triggers the grief of his own father's death 2 decades prior. For this, he holds his dear cousin tighter against the deepening gloom. And then the green skin came, Ingrid says. Your father, Tyrann pauses and reorganizes his thoughts carefully, relieved of his pacification duties. With your help, Ingrid interrupts, but he demurs. Relieved of pacification duties and strengthened by emergent industry, the general was able to launch a system campaign to finally clear out an orc-free port. But the orcs are possessed of some cunning and some technological capability. They learn of this deployment or sense it. I'm not sure how, but when the general departs, the orcs raid Dassaria in force. The blue outline of her shadow nods. You must understand, cousin. Governor Ithan destroyed the status quo of an entire planet. Regressionists, fifth columnists, and outright anarchists stood in his way for a generation. Michael pauses solemnly. In those long years, the governor's mind had become troubled. In the wake of an outright invasion, he cannot cope with this new reality. He rejects the veracity of the situation, a meta-denial. The orcs destroy a province, so he blames dissenters. A communication relay burns, and he blames radicals. Conspirators lurk in every shadow, and he pollutes the defense of Desaria with paranoia. The people suffer greatly. With his breath frosting in the dark, he steals his voice. And the orcs do it right. First, they destroy the astropathic choir, then the spaceport. In a month, they're at the palace walls. As commander of the household guard, nominal command of the final defense falls to me. His mind wanders, remembering the scene. A black sky, the stars all choked out by ash. Barely 100 rifles hold the walls. Memories of brutal hand-to-hand combat flash in his mind like the afterimage of some illumination burned into his retina. You were there, cousin. But I don't know how bad you know that it was. Governor Ithan countermanded my orders with delusions of opening a second front. Ammunition stores were misappropriated. He tried to host an actual banquet once. Michael drifts off as he comes too close to the memories. And then your father returns. A single shot splits the night, and suddenly sanity is restored to our war plans. Inch by inch, the green tide is rolled back. Ingrid sits in the dark, comparing these facts against what she knows and remembers to complete her picture of events. Who killed our uncle? She asks with uncharacteristic timidity. You were there, commander of the apparatus meant to keep him safe. He sighs in the freezing gloom. Yes, but that apparatus was past its breaking point, under siege as we were. But no one knows. I certainly don't. Some say it was a sentry, and some say it was your uncle. Others speak of suicide as lucidity returned to him. But I wasn't there. I was plugging a breach above the South Gardens. But even if I had been there, I don't know that I would have stopped it. He pauses and swallows to keep his voice from hitching. So far from imperial dominance, we must tend to ourselves. Our uncle deserved to die. And if your father did do it, he knew the consequences. He did it to save Desaria, making him a hero and making your claim to the throne more valid. If honor had allowed, I would have lied to protect your father. She is crying for the last time in her life, the grief all welling up in an uncomplicated catharsis. For these tears, he holds her tighter against the gloom. Cousin, whatever I am now in the Imperial Guard, and whatever our status is as a noble family, I remain the Captain General of the Desarian household. I will always protect you. Her body is still as the tears calm to sobs, and Ingrid anchors herself back into the quiet fortress of her duty to her people. She brushes a sleeve against her face and finds the tears have already frozen. Was there ever anything redeeming to the old governor? And Tyrion has to think about this for some time. He is quiet for so long that she grows worried that he has fallen asleep. I can't judge him by the glory he attempted to achieve for our planet, only by the devastation it culminated with. He was a terrible person. Evil. Greedy for power. Suspicious of everyone. He had the whole planet subjugated under a reign of terror. We did what was necessary to survive. I will atone for that. Michael shakes his head to quit that memory. The heart of a Desarian is rakish. A rogue by design. Fiercely independent. Because we have to be. What can be given can be taken. Gifts are only an exercise of control. The ignorant, thinking only of his intent, might forgivingly call him a leader. He wasn't. Michael quiets again, stalking out on a hesitation, trying to punctuate this sentiment with something definitive. He was a tyrant.
Subscribe, like, follow,